Misha here, and it's been a little bit since I've done a video on the Harrier. I've done multiples in the past, so you probably wonder what I'll be doing this one on. Kind of wonder myself. But I have two new models, and I've tried to get some new stuff to talk about. You have seen this one before. This is the British GR.7, circa 2006 from Afghanistan. That one you've seen before. But over here we have the relatively short-lived GR.5 variant. I thought about buying a more armed up one, but I thought, why not be different? This is a late 80s test type version for the new Pegasus engine they were using. And finally over here we have the last version in British service, the GR.9, and this is pretty much at the end of its service, 2010 give or take paint scheme. And these are all technically Harrier 2s, all of course British military service, and they're pretty much all anglicized versions of the AV-8B used by the U.S. Marine Corps. So, yeah, I thought I'd talk about the different variants in the story here. All three models are 1/72 scale diecast from Hobbymaster. These two actually came with a few different ordnance loadouts and options. I went a little kind of fun with this one, I know, but my model, so why not? So these are both armed up. This over here is pretty much empty for flight testing and just general use. So yeah, I don't want to talk about the whole American side of things right now, but in Britain, first they were interested in an updated Harrier, but then there wasn't government funding. You had so much the same happening in America. They basically ended up being a junior partner, kind of on their own airplane. And the prototype for the GR.5 flew on April 30th, 1985. And basically, it is a vast improvement over the original Harrier in most ways. It has more lift, better endurance, range, higher altitude. They went to a larger wing. They also use more composite materials, so even though the plane is physically larger, it actually conserves on weight where it can. Of course, it has lots of modernization. The new Pegasus engine variant is more powerful. The original Harrier, the GR.1, GR.3, could carry about 5,000 pounds in ordnance. The newer versions, the 5 and the 7, could carry as much as 8,000 pounds. The original had a total of 5 hard points. The newer version has up to 8. New max altitude is 50,000 feet. The larger wing is about 30 feet and 4 inches, tip to tip. And the overall length is just under 46.5 feet. These were originally designed to use a new 25mm cannon, actually 2 of them. The original Harrier used a 30mm, but really this never got completely off the ground. And so cannon were rarely, if ever, fit as far as I know. Of course, it's a single-seater. There was a two-seat training variant, but it's neither here nor there for this video. The only place really the new Harrier kind of loses out to the original is in speed. This one has a top speed, giving, model variants, but around 660 to 665 miles per hour. The original was good up to about 710 to 730 miles per hour. So it is slower. But these, as well as the U.S. Marine Corps planes, were designed for close air support, ground strike, that kind of thing. They were an attacker. They were not meant for air superiority. Although they could do that role. And of course, like the original Harrier, this was capable of short takeoff and landing, as well as vertical takeoff and landing. With the typical restrictions, this is a subsonic aircraft. After the initial test flight, the GR.5 would go into production in 1987, being delivered the first units to the RAF that year. And the first squadron would be declared initially operationally ready at the end of 1989 and stationed in West Germany in 1990. However, when the Gulf War rolled around in January of 1991, it was just considered too new and not ready for prime time. So these did not see service in the first Gulf War. They were still relying on some older GR.3s. In a way, though, the GR.5 was an interim measure. And by that I mean I think they always knew the GR.7 was coming. The initial order was for 60 units, but they actually only made 41 GR.5s as such. They were designed without night capability, so they were analogous to the earliest AV-8s used by the Marine Corps. Originally, we were going to have a infrared camera in the nose, but this never came to fruition, much like the 25mm gun pod. And a few other things that just didn't quite make it into the design. In fact, some have said this was never really fully operational ready. It was never fully approved with the newer weapons, missiles, and whatnot, trials, and so on and so forth. They only made, like I said, 41 of the 5s. The next version, the 5A, they would make 21 of. And the 5A was basically them making changes to the design so that it would be easier to retrofit to what would become known as the GR.7. The GR.7, over here, the prototype first flew in November of 1989, so right as the GR.5 was going into service and being declared somewhat operational, it did quite well, and it would enter into production in May of 1990. The first one would be delivered and start to be put through testing and use in August, September of 1990. And by 1991, the contract would be fulfilled. Now, what they would do, they would order 34 new airframes to be GR.7s. And of the 62 GR.5s and GR.5As, 58 of them would be upgraded over time to the GR.7 standard. So what do we have here? This is like the AV-8B night attack version used by the Americans. It has compatibility for night goggles. It has additional sensors, nighttime avionics. It is mostly a sensor and avionics upgrade, although they did give it better weapons compatibility. They also improved the ejection seat and some other things. They tweaked the engine a bit, the Pegasus engine, to get a little bit of performance out of it. So in all ways, it was just a more refined version. To that end, the GR.5's career was exceedingly brief. Yes, they were stationed in West Germany to be used as interceptors, interdictors, but then the Cold War ended, and that need was kind of gone. They did not serve in the Gulf War. They did serve briefly in 1993, helping the British contingent enforce the no-fly zone in Iraq, or over Iraq, I should say. But that was really about it. By 1994, the older GR3s were pretty much all pulled out of service. Of course, production on the GR.5 was long over. And most were converted to GR.7s, and a couple were scrapped. Also in 1994, they would begin carrier deck operational testing for this guy, which will come in useful later. And they would bring back something that they had gotten rid of. The GR3 had a reconnaissance ability, reconnaissance pod. That had kind of been dropped with the GR.5. But events after the Gulf War showed that it was necessary, and the older GR3 pods, though they could be retrofitted, were a pain in the ass. So this would lead to an updated reconnaissance pod made for the GR.7. Also in the 90s, they would go to the GR.7A. They would produce 30 of these by installing uprated Pegasus engines. So, of the fleet of roughly 92, about 1/3 would be the A. They would just give it a little bit better performance, a little bit better lift, especially later on in places like Afghanistan, where they were operating in such environments where extra power was necessary. So it was an alternative to be used, but not all of them needed the new engine. In 1995, the GR.7 would get its first field deployment. These would be flown and used over former Yugoslavia, specifically mostly Bosnia. They would have some records there. Then in 1997, some of these started being assigned to British carriers, escort carriers, and they were going to operate alongside their FA-2 cousins. These would be on the carriers to provide ground strike ability, close air support, with the Sea Harriers providing escort, air defense, air superiority. Something similar had been arranged in 1982 during the Falklands. At that time, we had the FRS-1 for the Sea Harrier, and we had the GR.3. So even then, RAF Harriers were stationed on board carriers. And this was put into effect in 1998, when some were stationed in the Persian Gulf to again enforce UN sanctions against Iraq. And then in 1999, GR.7s were sent to Kosovo. And also, a new laser targeting pod was introduced for this aircraft, so it could designate its own targets with its own laser and hit them, and along with this ability to use newer munitions. Unfortunately, they never really made enough targeting pods, but they did go ahead and they upgraded them to be able to fire the American Maverick air-to-surface missile around 2000, which would again come in useful. Like I said, this had 8 hardpoints, and it could carry 8,000 pounds. It could carry 6 Sidewinder missiles, 4 Mavericks. It could carry 4 rocket pods, or later rocket clusters. The cannon thing never really came to be, though. It could also carry iron bombs, or just kind of straight rockets if needed. So pretty versatile. And you gotta remember, 8,000 pounds for a jump jet, as they're kind of often called, is not bad. I'm nervous about trying to pick these up, guys. These were night and all-weather capable. They had updated sensors, including forward-facing infrared. You can tell a difference in the noses. The original 5 has a pretty straightforward conical nose, while the 7 has an extended nose with a bulge on the top for gear. It also has these 2, I've seen them referred to as tusks. It also has more antennae in the back, including for a GPS and data link. So it's just more capable. And of course, once the War on Terror began, these would be called upon. They would be used in March of 2003 in the initial stages of the Second Iraq War to provide close air support to invading Allied troops. Interestingly, they worked quite seamlessly with American aircraft and assets on the ground, thanks to modernizations and the fact that America had a different but still similar version. In addition to that, they would be used to attack Scud missile sites. Always an annoyance from Saddam, or as they used to call him, so damn insane. They would also attack targets of opportunity like tankers, artillery, even tanks themselves. So, just striking the ground. But mostly they would be called in because these could operate from very forward bases and had very good rapid response. And they, along with the American AV-8s, really obtained a good kind of rep with the soldiers. And then in 2004, the GR.7 started to go into Afghanistan, actually relieving U.S. Marine Corps Harriers, and would kind of continue to serve, having a very distinguished close air support, relief, and whatnot record. Now, all throughout this time, several updates and changes and patches and modernizations had been added to the fleet, some of which dated back to the GR.5, some started as 5As, some were pure 7s. My point is, by 2005, the fleet was a little bit messy. Some planes had this update, some planes had that update, some could take this weapon, some couldn't. And that's what would lead to the GR.9, our final version here. They rightly decided that, hey, we need to have a standard. We need to just take all the aircraft, maybe retire ones that are showing fatigue, and update the rest to a common standard. Give them all the same updates. And of course, while they did that, they would introduce yet more changes. The 9 was more focused on modern communications equipment, as well as compatibility with newer advanced weaponry. The program would begin in 2006. As far as I know, they did not make new airframes. They were all upgraded. They would select 60 low mileage airframes from the GR.7, including the 30 GR.7As, so you'd have 30 and 30. The regular 7s would be changed into GR.9s, and the 7As would be known as 9 GR.9As. And of course they would have the uprated Pegasus engines. It would actually be very useful in Afghanistan. The first of the new GR.9s would be deployed there in January of 2007. And would continue to serve alongside the GR.7. Now it's worth pointing out that in 2006, the Navy's Sea Harriers were decommissioned. They were retired. So to that end, more GR.7s and GR.9s were stationed on board their escort carriers, the Invincible class, mostly. Originally, of course, they were going to go for the F-35B Lightning II. That was going to be the replacement, but you know how that went. So, I mean, it's now in service, but much longer than expected. So there was a gap with the Sea Harriers gone, so the ground-based versions were put on ships. They'd actually been formalized, the arrangement, beginning around 2000 with the Joint Harrier Task Force, or Joint Harrier Program, where Sea Harriers and Harrier IIs would operate together officially. But anyway. So the upgrade program would continue, with the last GR.9s being delivered in 2009. So our fleet has been downsized from a roughly 90 down to about 60. Continue to provide close air support. And this is, of course, an aging airframe at this point. It's modernized well, but you can only do so much. Originally, the plan was to retire the Harrier in 2018, so just a couple of years ago. But it was decided because of budgetary reasons, something had to be cut. It was kind of a toss-up between this and the Tornado. Eventually, it was decided to keep the Tornado longer and retire the Harrier in 2009. So beginning around the summer of 2009, the Harrier was withdrawn from Afghanistan, being replaced by the aircraft, or sometimes by nothing at all, frankly. And they would continue to operate off of naval assets in 2010 with the final cruise. The GR.7s would all be retired out, the remaining ones retired out by early to mid 2010, leaving only the GR.9 flying. The last mission from a carrier that a GR.9 would fly was in November of 2010. And pretty much at this point they're drawing down, and the remaining jump jets were formally and officially and completely retired in April of 2011. And they weren't just retired. In November of that year, pretty much the entire remaining fleet, at least 72 of them, so the vast majority, were sold to the U.S. Marine Corps. Now, the Marines weren't planning to refurbish them and fly them. They pretty much wanted them for spare parts. Makes sense, as the Marines would continue to use the Harrier for some time longer. This left a major gap because yet again the F-35B had been delayed. Although today, 2020, it's finally coming online. So yeah, in the past I haven't talked about the variations. Hope I got something on camera for you here. I really do think, I don't usually go for the more extravagant schemes, but this, it's got a really glossy finish. It's a dark color. And since the GR.5 is a pretty short-lived thing, I think it's just neat to have one, and there are differences. It's far less antennae-y, far less sticking out, much smoother design. But yeah, aside from some time in West Germany and a bit of patrolling in the Middle East, these didn't do much. They were pretty much always an intermediate step. I mean, it was a modern fighter that wasn't nighttime capable, so. With the nose being the biggest indicator. The GR.7 was certainly the mainstay, coming into service in the early 90s and not leaving it until 2010. These were around for nearly 2 full decades, seeing many upgrades and improvements over the time. They proved the ability to do quite a few roles, and to be a vast improvement in terms of capability and safety compared to the earlier GR.3 and definitely GR.1. It's worth noting that these two took quite a long time to be fully certified and approved to carry a bunch of ordnance. They were still doing a lot of testing through the 90s, and it really wasn't until after the events over Bosnia, so 1996-97, that these were really, truly, fully capable, and even then they were still receiving updates and changes. Like I said, the laser pod, newer reconnaissance pods, and newer ordnance like the Maverick. And the easiest way to tell these, of course, is their nose. And the GR.9 really was in service very briefly, if you consider 2007 to 2011, so just over 4 years. But again, it really was just a standardization and modernization package. And to be fair, they were expecting it to be in service for about a decade. It's just government budgets and stuff. You can usually tell it by the ordnance it carries, because really the airframe is very, very similar. A few different antenna arrangement, but that's about it from the GR.7. So just under 100 Harrier 2s were in British service. Lasting a little under 32 years all told. Again, sorry for not picking these models up. I just, with one hand, I'm afraid. And there's a lot of sticky out bits on these. Pretty neat, as you'd expect. The and I've got this one in the down position. The jets exhausts rotate, all 4 of them. Also, the tailplane, the stabilizers, move in the back. I may regret trying to do this. Okay, I think I get it. I just got everything stuck on this one. It doesn't like to always stay, so if I'm being ginger, I apologize. I think that's neat how it rotates down. And it seems like they do ship their Harriers with quite a few ordnance options The US Marine ones do come with the cannon pod. These don't, because again, they never really used it. This one pretty much comes as you see it with the pylons. This one has some sidewinders you can put on if you want it in more of a all-around or even air defense role. And this one has a few other different types of ordnance. I think it's pretty much all air to surface though, because by the time of the GR.9 that's what these were used for. They knew it. And of course all the models have the same features. Gear up or down, canopy open or close, removable pilot figure. Pretty much all metal. That's one that I like, the Hobbymaster Harriers. The wings, even the tailplane is metal. Of course the ordnance is plastic. But yeah, as I've said in past videos, the Harrier is one of my favorites, if you can't tell from how many times I've brought it up. And since I had a couple of new models I picked up last year that you haven't seen, I thought, why not mention them? I hope you enjoyed it. Hope I got something on camera for you. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And please check out some of my other videos. I think it's time for me to hit the hay, folks. I'll catch you next time.